So we'll get started here. We got a few people in. Anybody else can join in later. So my name is Jamal Abercrombia. Some of you guys might know me. I might be your advisor over here. Might have done a few sessions with you on this topic or other topics. Others might know me as the guy you call when you need to get Pro Tools or something's going wrong. I'm the fixer for that. But today what we're going to be looking at is how to go ahead and start a mix. So this is super important in my opinion for multiple reasons. One, it's important for yourself. You need to have a really quick workflow. When you're doing a mix, you don't really want to spend 8+ hours on a mix. You want to get down to that 4 or less amount of hours on a mix, because time is money, and the more time you have to actually spend getting things ready, trying to figure out where to go with the mix, the more money is lost ultimately. The other reason why it's important for a lot of you guys at this stage, and even myself sometimes, because I'm not always running a session. Sometimes if I'm with a bigger engineer, a bigger client, I am an assistant. So it's really important that you know how to prep a mix so that way your engineer can go in and do all the stuff they need to do. I remember when I first got started, it was like, when I say 2012 or something like that, is when I had my internship with June Boss Music with a guy named John Major. He was doing a lot of big tracks, and he wanted me to clean up a session for him and just get ready for him to do the mix. And I didn't even really think much about it. I just did what I was doing for myself at the time when I was getting started with mixing. I was just organizing my tracks, color coding, marking form, making little notes on the side for things that need to be done in the mix, like, oh, fix this, do this or that, and whatnot. He saw that and he was really impressed by that. And I was kind of taken aback because I was like, well, it's just, basic stuff, whatever, but from then on, I realized, it goes to that whole thing that some of your mentors might be talking about, like everything matters. You always have to be doing the best with everything. You always want to present stuff in the best light, and you always want to make things easier for the person who's going to be receiving your work, because this is a handoff. All this music stuff is a handoff. It goes from one person to the next person, and that's how we get the job done. So with that being said, after you get done recording, or whoever it is recording, and you get these tracks, you want to make sure that they're all in order and ready to go, so the person mixing them, whether it be yourself or another engineer, has everything ready to go, and can get going real smooth. So just to give you guys a little bit of background on myself, I am an audio engineer, also a songwriter, musician. I played in tons of bands around Los Angeles, done like lots of solo gigs, and been in school for a while too, as a music major. So I'm pretty well versed with music and sound. And as I tell some of you guys when we do sessions, everything is about music and using your ears. So I am going to be relating this stuff back to using your ears and why this is all practical. It's not just numbers. It's not just doing it, because it's everything. Everything has a reason. It has to do with making the best music possible. So let's go ahead and get started. And I just want to let you guys know before I switch over to this screen with the Pro Tools session, in the top right-hand corner, I believe for you guys, there's going to be a box with 9 squares. And it looks like the Chrome Remote desktop box that you click on. Click that if you want to go ahead and ask a question. I'll go ahead and I'll look through these questions periodically while we're doing this broadcast. Some of them I'll get to as they come up. Others I'll probably do at the end of the broadcast. But just keep asking them. We'll keep checking them, and we'll go from there, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to this Pro Tools session here. Go ahead and share that. Okay, so this is a little song called Fair Warning. It's from a band called Split Enz. That band's broken up. Not the band from the 70s, Split Enz, different band, Split Enz. And so what we have here is obviously we have a bunch of tracks. This is a rock song, but this tutorial can apply to other sessions that you're doing, but we're going to look at this with rock because we've got a lot of tracks here. There's some specific stuff that you want to do with this mix prep here. So first thing is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the song. You want to listen to the song while you're doing this. Sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many guys call in asking how to get started with the mix, and you guys start turning knobs or moving faders without actually listening to what's going on in the song. So you really want to just be listening to this over and over again, because this song needs to be, this is you for however long you're doing this mix, however long it takes, this is you. So you need to know this song kind of forward and back. It's like the back of your hand, but better. So we're going to go ahead and just take a quick listen to it. I've heard it 1,000 times, and we don't have too much time, so we're not going to listen to everything straight through, but I just want to give you guys an idea of what's going on here. So first thing I would probably do is turn on this little mode here, insertion follows playback because I want to keep the song going and I want to be able to make notes and stop it without going back to where my timeline was left off. So I'm just listening here. There's a lot of blank space. Okay. Now, normally, like I was saying, you would just listen to the track all the way through, just so you get an idea of what's going on. But the second and third listen, all those following listens, what I usually do is I will go ahead and make notes. That's why I want to turn on insertion follows playback, so I can just stop it and I can continue on where I left off, like it just did there. So in the beginning, one, I can see that there's a bunch of blank space in this mix that I don't need. Now, there's a few reasons why you want to get rid of this blank space or seemingly blank space. And the first one is a big one here. It's because there could be extra noise or extra BS going on in the track that you don't need. So this looks like it's relatively flat. There's nothing going on here. But if this waveform wasn't zoomed in, if it was smaller, you wouldn't be able to see that little blip was there. And if I zoom in on that, I can see that there is some noise there, and you don't want to have that in your track. The last thing you want is to send out a track that has beginning noise in it or, parts that aren't right. So you always want to look for that stuff, and we're just going to get rid of that stuff, or I'll make a note of it and get rid of it, so I can either do a marker. So if we look up here, I have the plus option, marker, say, oh, blank space, something like that, delete. Just to keep yourself organized. If you can remember to do it without having a marker or you want to do it in real time, that's totally fine. The other option is to go ahead and go to comments. So if you go over to comments, sorry, 1 second, let me move this over here so I can see if you guys are asking questions. Okay, so if you pull up the comments option here, you can make notes for yourself to go ahead and take stuff in and out. I use the comments to go ahead and say whether I need to automate something or if I need to change the color or if maybe something's a little bit weak. I do this a lot with drums because drums, most pop records, most rock records these days have some kind of drum replacement. So I like to go ahead and mark where I'm going to do some drum replacement if I'm not doing like a blanket drum gog or trigger over something. It's like, say, this part's a little bit choppy, a little bit weak. Maybe this hit's clipping. I can make a note of that and tell myself where I'm going to take a part from to replace it. So a good option to have. I don't like to keep comments up the whole time because it does take up a lot of space in my string. So I like to take those in and out. So moving forward with this, so say we did listen to it a few times. Next thing I probably would want to do, and this is where I really start to maneuver, is go ahead and add markers showing form. So I always know where my verses and chorus and all that stuff is. So first one I do is usually intro. So you can do like right here, right at the beginning. Intro. Very simple. So I'm just going to listen through, skip ahead a little bit, and we're just going to look for like, where the vocal starts, where my verse is. Okay, so I have my vocal right here. Okay, a second here. Let me go ahead and mark a form. So I have my vocal, I have my verse. Now, one other thing I like to do with my markers, you can't just leave them blank like this, but if this isn't already set up in your system, this might be really useful for you. Quit that, sorry. Always display marker colors. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me get something together here. Just seeing what questions came through. Okay, it looks like we already have a question here. Sorry about that. So what is Trigger? Trigger is a Slate digital program or Slate drums. Either way, it's from Steven Slate. But you can get that. It's like Drumagog. What it does is it will scan for transients for drums, and then you can replace that transient with a triggered sound or a sampled sound. Really, really handy for doing a mix. I remember when the first time I found out about triggers, because I spent an entire week, and I'm not joking, I mean like 8 hours each day, Saturday and Sunday, replacing drums by hand because I didn't know what trigger was. I was like, God damn, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And that's when I discovered Drumagog. So Trigger is just another alternative to Drumagog. I like Trigger a little bit better. Smaller client, so it doesn't take up so much space and doesn't crash your CPU as much. And Drumagog also, I think, has a bit of a latency issue on some systems. For me, I know it does, and I can't stand it. I'm really particular about that if I'm replacing drums. So I like to use Trigger if it's available. So anyway, back to this mix here. So we're just going to go through and mark the form really quick. We're not going to spend too much time on that. So I kind of know the song already. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this a pre-chorus. I can kind of hear that's a pre-chorus. If there's a little bit of tension building up, we know it's going to something big. Now, just as a warning for this song, it doesn't have a typical verse, chorus thing. The chorus is kind of, it's there, but it's not like you're, singing chorus, like your typical melodic kind of thing going on. It's a rock song. It's a riff rock song. So I'm going to label this pre-chorus and chorus just because it's easier that way right now. So right there, about 35 is where my chorus comes in. Oops, let me get that right. Let's see here, looks like something like solo. Let's see here, give me a second. Looks like something got deleted here, so I'm going to fix that real quick. All right, now we're going to go back to 35. And I think there was a question there asking if I always start with drums, and the answer is no, I don't always start with drums. Not with this process here. I'm doing a bunch of other stuff before I even get to my drums. Just cleaning everything up and listening to the song. When I start my mix, I usually do a combination of drums and bass together for this type of music. Let's see here. So let's go ahead and go forward. Let's listen to some more of this. All right, so we got another verse here. So shortcut to enter in memory locations, hit enter if you have a number pattern keyboard. I know most of you guys have MacBooks, so you don't have that option, but it's there for if you do. So verse 2, so on and so forth. So you can see what I'm doing here with the workflow. Now, the next thing I would do is I'm going to start creating some space, because if you're listening to this now, you can tell, like, I can't really tell what's going on here. So your job here as a mix engineer, after you've already cleaned up some of the BS that's in the track, labeled some form, is to go ahead and start creating some space and start creating some groups. So one thing I like to do is I like to have all my different elements together. My drums, guitars, basses, all that stuff color-coded, nice and organized for myself. So I'm going to just go ahead and look through the track. I would be doing this while I'm listening to the music, but since you guys probably can't hear me if the music's playing, I'm not going to play it. So I'm just looking through, taking account for what I have here. So I have some drums, have some different kicks here. Let's see, there is some kind of trigger here on the kick, some samples. So I'm going to put those in the same group. I'm going to just move stuff around that I don't necessarily need to have in this section. So I'm going to gather all my drums real quick. Looking around. And sometimes when you're doing this and you're listening through, you'll find that there are elements that you won't need inside of a mix. Sometimes they're there as like scratch, or sometimes, you know, you just hearing it, it's like this isn't necessary. It's causing clutter. You gotta be a little bit careful with that though, depending on who your client is. If you're kind of at the status, or you know the person and they can say, yeah, take some stuff out if you think it's okay, do that approach. You know, Tom Lord-Alge talks a lot about that, you know, taking stuff out of mix that's not really adding to the music. However, you know, you are kind of at the service position for the most part as a mix engineer, so you don't always want to just take people's stuff out and say, oh, it's not necessary. You know, you can get in some hot water for that. So it looks like we do have some drums here, everything. So we're gonna go ahead and color code these. So I like to have my drums red, just because it's it's an organizational thing for me. I choose different colors as I'm going along, but I usually choose my drums as red. Now I'm just going to look for my guitars. So with this kind of song, I can already hear there's a whole bunch of guitar stuff going on, a bunch of stacks. We'll talk about that in a second, because there's some special stuff you want to consider with these guitar stacks. Let's see here. Lots of guitar going on. Basses I don't put in the same group. I put my basses in a separate group, because I treat them a little bit differently. Don't want to have them on the same submix. And again, I kind of know this track, but if I didn't know this track, some of these things I would have some questions on, like this OD57, OD122 track. It doesn't look like it's named a guitar track, so I would probably go through while I'm listening to this track and I'm taking account for what I have. I would listen to this and solo it just to find out what it's doing, what it is. Okay, so I know those are guitars. I'm going to put those in the same guitar place. Let's see here. So again, you know, OD257, you know, I wouldn't know what that is, so I'd have to solo it. And I'd still want to solo, even if I do know it's a guitar, I want to solo it so I know what that guitar is doing, because I'm going to treat that differently. We're going to talk about that a little bit once we get to panning. So we got some licks here. Add those into our guitar group as well. Looks like that's the end of it. No keyboards or anything on this song. It's real, just real heavy. So we didn't use any of that stuff. Go ahead and color code these. Looks like I lost the other tracks in my group, so I'll go back and add those in there as well. Okay. And just so you guys remember, if you need to ask a question, remember to hit that box in the right top right hand corner with the 9 squares in there, so you can go ahead and get your question answered. So we do these lime green because we're in that kind of mood today. And I can go ahead and just put these right under my drum tracks. Perfect. So you can see here, really easy to see, really easy to navigate through this session so far. You know, we have our tracks color coded. We have our markers up here. So we can just see exactly where we are for what instrument. And also, if you look over here in the tracks view, you can see that these are color coded as well. So again, makes it really easy for you to get around. So we're just going to do a few more of these. Like I said, there's not too much going on here other than the basic rock band stuff, the guitars, drums, bass, and some vocal. So we just have a few more tracks we're going to organize. Now these basses, let's see here. I've already ran across a few different things for the basses. I have 2 bass tracks here, so I'm thinking this is probably going to be a DI and some kind of amp. And then I also had a scratch bass. Now, oh, actually that's the wrong group. Now the scratch bass, I'm probably going to take this out because, you know, it's probably a scratch track. I will listen to it just to see if there's any good stuff in there. I will just color code it and add it to this group now because I don't want to waste much time listening to everything too detailed. I know that it's a bass, so I'm just going to put in that bass group so that way when I get ready to deal with my basses, I can deal with all of them at once. I don't have to take too much time to change that right away. I've got one more bass track to add there. And then for vocals, I don't think we have too much going on with those vocals. I think we just had one vocal going on in this demo. I don't think we had any backups or anything by the time we were at this stage. Or by the time I was at this stage with the mix here. So this audio 1 track doesn't look like it's doing anything. I'm just going to check the playlist here. So if you ever want to check the playlist and see, you know, what other takes are available to you, if they're not broken up into tracks, which sometimes they won't be, you want to go and click on the view mode for the track you're on. You can go to playlist, and you can see if there's anything. So if there is any available audio there, you'll see it on this little line here. It's hard to highlight. You can't, well, actually, you can't highlight it, but it's right under the actual place where the region goes. You'd see, you know, the audio there. You can also click this arrow here, and it would tell you if there's any playlist there. Let me see if I can demonstrate it on a different track. So yeah, so you can see it here on this bass track. There's alternative audio there. So if I need to pull from a different take, if I'm not just doing a mix, if I'm doing some comps, if I'm at that stage, I want to pull up playlist and have that available for me. But this audio track 1 doesn't look like it's doing anything, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. It's just causing clutter. And then we have our vocals here. Also we have a talkback mic here that's not doing anything, so I'm also going to take that out as well. The system we were using did not have a built-in talkback or something like that. I can't remember, it was so long ago. So we had a talkback mic going on there. And then vocals will just do orange. So what we've covered so far with this mix, getting everything organized into groups, or, you know, color-coded groups so far. Talked about looking for dead space, listening through the track, and most importantly, so you know what's going on before you start moving stuff around. Marking forms so you know how to get around quickly. I think that was about it. So now we're going to go ahead and look into creating some space. And while we're doing that, I also want to go ahead and make some big groups, groups that like real groups. To use in this groups window here. So the first group we have is the all group. That's going to be there by default. So you turn that on, all the tracks are affected equally. Turn that off and it turns off. There's one thing I should mention before we go on to the other groups. What I really like to do is I like to make a group called sends, master, or all tracks, something like that. Something that lets me know that it's just all my audio tracks, not my aux tracks. I do this later in the mix sometimes, and I say that's why I name it like sends, aux tracks, or just all audio tracks, because I don't want to have my audio tracks that, or my aux tracks I may have added in the mix while I was doing stuff when I'm making this big group. This big group is so that I can turn everything down at once, all my audio-based tracks down at once. The all group is going to turn down every track that you have in the session at once. It's going to turn down your aux track. It's going to turn down your master fader. You don't want to have your aux track and your master fader turned down when you're trying to turn down audio-based tracks, because that messes stuff up. Your master fader typically is supposed to be at 0. Your aux tracks, depending on how you're using them, if you're using them as a receiver for sends, those should be at 0 because you're controlling the blend with the send value. And that's for a different session. We're not going to talk too much about sends now. We might do that in a different session. We'll talk about, mixing some guitars. But just keep that in mind. Your aux tracks, if you're using them as a receiver for a send, those should be at 0. No hard and fast rule. It's music. If it sounds right, it's right. But generally speaking, aux tracks at 0. So I make this sends aux tracks, or all audio tracks group here. So I have that available to me, so I can just turn on audio-based tracks. So I call it big audio or something like that. Yeah. I'll turn that off because I don't need to have that on for right now. I'm going to go through, and again, I'd be listening. I'm just going to make some other groups. I'm going to make a real drum group, like one I can control, like my all group, my big audio group. So Command G is the shortcut for that, or if you don't want to use a shortcut, you click that little arrow next to the groups option. You can go to new group. You can see the shortcuts there too, and I'm going to call this drums. Nice and clean. Do the same for my guitars. Guitars. And remember, guys, if you have questions, go ahead and hit that box up in the top right. You guys can get those questions answered. Then I got one for basses. I'll just call it bass. And then last, vocal. So again, need to make a group. Click that arrow there next to the group box. New group, vocals. Now, when I'm making groups, and this might come for you later in the mix process, it might come for you now if you choose to do it this way or whatever way you choose to do it. You might end up making some subgroups. You make them the same way as you would make the regular groups. I just call them subgroups because it's like guitars, and they have like rhythm guitars or stat guitars or lead guitars, something like that. So I know that these are things I'm going to. So because you'll run across a lot of situations where you just need to turn down all the guitars in general. Sometimes you just need to turn up all the lead guitars. You need to pan out or move all the rhythm guitars. So I like to make these subgroups. So again, as I'm taking account, I'm noticing what I have here, and I might take the time now and start soloing stuff because I've already heard the song a few times through. I know what's going on. I'm familiar. I'm trying to create space now. So I'm gonna solo this. Let's turn off this group first though. So I'm gonna solo some of these guitars just so I can understand what's going on, so I know where they are, what they're doing. And always look for different little tips to get you through this. So I'm looking at this session here, and I see that I have Gib tone, so it's Gibson type tone guitar or whatever. I'm seeing that I have one here, and I have what looks like a duplicate. So I'm using that as a hint to say, well, this is probably the same part. It's probably the same octave, same voicing, all that stuff. Looks like it's just a different take. Now, using your knowledge about this type of music, you can say this is probably a stack. So you want to start thinking about this. This may be a good time to pull up your comments because you want to think about, where am I going to place this? Is this a stack that needs to be together? Am I putting both these guitars on the left side? Or am I going to go ahead and put these on separate sides? And that will be determined based on the other guitars that you have. But you can take note now and be like, oh yeah, stack, stack guitars. Where am I going to pan them? Whatever you're going to choose to do with those guitars. So I'm just going to go through solo guitars, just for exercise purposes here. Look at that. Comments. Okay, so I see that all those guitars there, those big blocks, those are all just stacks. Looks like we have another question here from Liam. Let's see. Yes, you can rewatch this on YouTube if you'd like to. So try to listen to it now. Don't worry about writing stuff down. You can get that later on. So anyway, back to our guitar stack. So I can make a subgroup now, guitar stacks. And I can adjust the volume of these stacks all together. So just for demonstration purposes. Pull those stacks down. So that's really handy if you have all your volumes adjusted the way you want them as you're doing this mix, but then you realize something is just too loud later on, or the whole part in general, the blend that you've created with your guitar stacks is too loud. You just do that because not everybody wants to use a subgroup A subgroup is when you take all your audio tracks and route them to one big aux track or another audio track if you want to print them. So it takes away, it'll take away all these tracks from the mix and just it'll combine them into one track. It'll sum them into one track. And that will take a little bit of weight off your master fader, because as some of you may know, if we've already done sessions together talking about this, your audio inside of your DAW is going to be summed, especially in Pro Tools. So it's all being added on top of each other. So it's really going to make your master fader clip. We're going to get to that in a second once we finish getting these groups together. So I'm just going to reset these volumes here. To reset volume inside of Pro Tools, reset volume, and if you're in the peak option, so if you go to the volume here and you click Command, you can switch to peak so you can see how loud something's getting, or delay compensation mode. To reset that to 0, you hit Option, you hold Option, you click it. So let's go through here. We won't worry too much about making any other subgroups here. I would like to make some subgroups with my drums, like with my overheads or my snares, because you do need to have those uniform. Your snares are supposed to be in phase and work together volume wise. So if you adjust one, you need to adjust the other. That's why I like to have a snare group. Or same thing with kick drums, if you have a bunch of kick drums in your mix. All right, so for now we'll leave those subgroups alone. Now let's look at, well, we don't have a master fader in here, so let's add our master fader in there. So for those of you who don't know, tracks, new, want our master fader to be stereo. There we go. We just need to create one. I like to put this at the bottom. Some people like to put it at the top. Doesn't matter. Wherever you like to have it. So we want to look at our master fader here, and you're going to notice that it's clipping right off the bat. Just totally smashed. Barely any movement there. So you really can't get a good idea of what's going on with your mix until you give yourself a little bit of headroom. So going back to our big audio group here, I turn this on so I can turn down all my audio-based tracks, because remember, I don't want to have my master fader below 0. I'm going to leave that at unity. I'm going to just play the track. And I'm listening and I'm watching my master fader, giving myself a little bit of headroom there so I can turn stuff up in the mix, because I'm not going to leave everything stagnant. I'm not going to leave everything at the same volume, -7.7. That's going to make your mix sound flat, and it's going to make nobody ever want to hire you as a mix engineer. It's going to make your engineer, your lead engineer, if you're working under one, re-question his or her decision. So make sure you don't leave your mix flat. But we are going to give it a little bit of headroom. -7.7 for our situation is the magic number. I usually look for about -6 to -12, depending on what it is. This is not the biggest session in the world. I mean, it's got a good amount of guitars in it, but you'll see sessions that have 40, 60 plus tracks depending on what the music is. So you turn it down based on that, because remember, your audio is summed up. So if you have more tracks, you might need to create more headroom. If you're using more, if you're playing or mixing a delicate song, you could probably get away with having less headroom because things aren't going to be smashing as much. But again, if you have 60 tracks, it's still probably going to be clipping. So you got to create that headroom. So I create some headroom here. So now I should be able to hear things a little bit better. That's one way I can hear things a little bit better. Now, the trick here too is you got to find that nice balance. So if you turn it down here, you turn down the tracks in your DAW, you probably got to turn up the audio on your interface or whatever you're using, your control, whatever your control console is. And looking at this, I might even give it a little bit more headroom, because we could see this line here. We did see that line there. Let me see if I can bring it back. So in Pro Tools, you can see that once you stop a track, there's a little line that tells you where the audio was peaking at. And it is peaking a little bit high now. So I know I am going to end up turning some stuff up, especially like some solos. I'm going to automate like the louder choruses. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more headroom here just to be safe. Now I'm going to start panning things. So again, got to use your tips, man. You see these tracks are labeled. Sometimes they're not going to be labeled as they're not going to be labeled the best. These tracks aren't necessarily labeled the best. They kind of give they show what the band and the engineer was doing at the time. If they're working on it themselves, that's totally fine. These aren't, they don't give the most information for somebody who's just looking at this for the first time. So if you need to relabel something, you relabel something. But we're going to look through this now. We're going to try to create some space. We're going to start to find out what this stuff is so we can move it out of the way. And you're going to use these hints here, track names. So if you're seeing things like overhead, left and right, well, obviously you got to pan those left and right. Don't leave those in the center, and don't waste too much time listening to, what's that doing? Because it says overhead, left and right. So move it to the left and the right. So got that to the left. Got that to the right. And again, we're always listening while we're doing this stuff. It's not arbitrary. Gotta be listening, paying attention. Now it looks like our floor toms and our regular toms already have been chopped up for us, so we're not going to worry about that. Sometimes you do have to go in and just find your transients within these instruments, because you might have a little bit extra dirt in there that's going to muddy up your mix. That can be done a little bit later on, but let me just pull that out so you guys can see. So see, there's that big glob there. That's really not something that's going to happen for this mix. It's just bleed. It's not really adding anything. All we really needed was this tom. You trim that stuff back, but it's already trimmed for us. So with toms, we're probably going to start panning these a little bit to the left or to the right, not something like 19 or 20. Chances are you're probably not mixing on the best system in the world, so hearing things at 19, 20 aren't going to make too much of a difference. You really got to go past like 30, 40, 50, hard left, hard right if you can. I know Chris Lord-Alge likes to do hard left, hard right. It obviously works really well for him. If you guys don't know Chris Lord-Alge, check him out. He's got a lot of really great rock mixes. But I do want to create some space in this mix, so I like to mix from drummers, from audience's perspective. So floor tom is usually going to be on the left side for my drummer. Looks like I have another floor tom here. It's not being used. We'll deal with that later. It doesn't really hold any bearing right now. Let's see what other stuff we have going on here. So I think we have some toms out. So I'm thinking these are rack toms. So I'll probably just pan these either left or right, depending on how many I have. If I have more than one rack tom, usually your higher rack tom is going to be on the right side. The lower rack tom is going to be on the left side. Again, from audience's perspective. So I'm just going to go ahead and listen to this and hear what the tom sounds like real quick, see what quality it has. Of course, it's really dead. You can't really hear too much of what's going on here, but for the sake of it, we're just going to go ahead and call it our right or left side rack tom. And I'm going to put it to the side a little bit to create a little bit of space in my mix. So let's see. Now we want to listen and see if we're going to use both of these toms here. Gives it a little bit of beef to have both of them in there, but you might change this later on when you're doing your mix. You might decide that you only have one tom in there. You might only have this original tom in there. You might re-trigger it so you get a better sound. Options that you have. For right now, we're just going to go ahead and move it over to the side, same as our tom out, whatever that may be. And if you need to get specific with your increments here, you can hold down Command and you can move your volume or your pan. So you click the thing you want to change first, hold Command, and then you can see you get small increments there. So I need to get 79. So I'm just gonna do like that real quick. Okay, so back to creating some space here. Snare, move it over to the side a little bit. Kick drum, leave it in the middle. Kick drum is foundational. You got to have that on this in the center. Once you get to your mix, you might move it over a little bit if you need to create a little bit of room for your vocal. For the most part, you're going to have your kick in the center, I think. At least I do for a lot of the time. My snares, I'm going to go ahead and move these over. I'm going to put a subgroup for my snares real quick. Have those ready. I'll do snare. It's 22. Let's do 30. 35. That's good. Okay. guys can hear it or not, but it should be a little bit wider now because we have our overheads over to the side. We have some toms over to the side. Even though they're not doing much, when we do hear them, it's gonna give us a wider image because we're just hearing them over to closer to one side. We're just gonna keep looking for some more stuff. So hi-hat definitely can move over to the side. And with hi-hat, just as a tip, sometimes you don't need a hi-hat in the mix. Sometimes a hi-hat is just a little too hot, and you can pick it up with the overhead. So sometimes you don't need to have that in the mix. But we're just gonna move it over hard right, or a little bit hard right, for right now, for the sake of time. So for me, it's definitely a lot wider. And so the more changes I make to get more space, the more I can get into the song, the more I start to realize what's really going on here with this mix, with this song, I should say. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to raise the drums a little bit because the drums, they sound a bit weak. I really want to be able to feel this a little bit more. I created some headroom. I might change my drums to being a little bit lower later on, but for right now, I'm going to just go ahead and I'll give them a little bit of boost, just a little bit higher, so I can feel a little bit more. And I'm gonna move on to these guitars and start creating some space here. So like I was saying earlier, you gotta decide what guitars are gonna go where based on what you're hearing. I'm just gonna go ahead and pan these hard left, hard right across some of my give tone guitars here, my duplicates. Put them on opposite sides from each other. Cool thing about this, with stacking guitars and moving them over to the side, if you have your player play the same part, just with maybe different guitar, even you can use the same guitar, same tone, or anything like that. If you have them play the same part, they're not going to play it exactly the same. So when you move them over to the side, you get a really nice fat sound because it's like natural chorusing or natural doubling. So sometimes it's just a good option to have those left and right automatically. Then I have some special guitars here. So I see like lo-fi guitars. So I need to make a choice where I'm going to put that. I'm just going to put that to the right side for right now. Again, should be listening to the music while you're doing this. You're not just doing it arbitrarily. So already the mix it's much better. It's wider, it's fatter. Now I'm really starting to get into the track. I can hear the emotion now. It's not just a big cluttered mess. Now this is interesting here. So these two guitars, the 57 and the 122, I can tell you now what these are. This is just a SM57, a Shure SM57 mic, and I think it's a Royer 122 is what it is. It's a ribbon mic. Sometimes you need to put these over to the opposite sides because they could be a little bit out of phase if they weren't mic'd properly, or maybe it was just the aesthetic of the time, the sound you wanted. Because sometimes when you see this, it's the same part but with two mics. Sometimes it's a shootout kind of thing, and you do need to have mics at separate distances. Sometimes it is for stack purposes, but with the same signal, meaning the same part at the same time, but with two different blends to make it fatter. Typically, when you do that and you want to keep it, you have to have the mics phase coherent, so the diaphragms got to be next to each other. But if you are just shooting them out, or maybe you're choosing one or the other in different sections, you do need to go ahead and pan these hard left, hard right. Otherwise, they're going to be kind of out of phase, like you can tell with these two. So if I sold these two and I put them back in the center, you can hear that's a bit nasally. That's not pleasant. It's probably not going to make for a lot of interesting mix. It's going to create a lot of mud. But if I move more to the side, you can hear they're wet now. They have a little bit more interest. So that might be what I'm going for. I don't necessarily think that I would be going for that nasally sound. Nasally sound is not really doing too much. But having that wetness there can be a good juxtaposition if you have some dry guitars in there. So having those over to the side creates that nice wetness. It will give it a little bit of lift, or the mid-range scoop sound, as some of you may know if you guys play guitar or play rock, metal, anything like that. So I'm just gonna put those over to the side. And then my talkback here. So it looks like the talkback mic in the room was picking up some guitar. There's a few records that have become hits with some of these mistakes. The best example is the Phil Collins drum sound. So what's that song? Feeling in the Air Tonight. You all probably know that song. That drum sound was a mistake. So just a quick story about that. I think Phil Collins and the engineer, I forgot who that was at the time. They were recording the song. They had the talkback on. The talkback had a gate on it. Had reverb and had gate on it. And Peter Gabriel came into the session. He was just trying to hear what Phil Collins was doing, whatever. And he heard that drum sound from the talkback mic. And Peter Gabriel was like, "Oh man, that's the best thing I've heard from this whole session." And so Phil Collins and the engineer were like, "Oh yeah, it was totally an accident," but they ended up using it for the track. So as good practice, just listen to it, see if there's anything of interest in there, because you could have some nice natural reverb that you want to use. So there might be something there, who knows? I'm not really going to explore too much right now, so I'm just going to leave it muted. But always just check and see what you have. Don't just throw stuff away. So again, we have more guitars down here. Just moving more to create some space. Alright, so now we have some different stuff. So now these aren't stacks. These are different parts. So you want to move these over to the side, definitely. You can move them around in different spots. You probably want to automate them left and right as the mix is going on. Again, keep things interesting, not have them stagnant. So I'm just going to move this over to the right. And I like to just solo the licks in the song to hear what they're doing, hear how they're interacting with each other. I can't exactly remember what's going on with these. Okay, so these seem like double licks. I might not need one of them, so maybe I'll just mute one for right now, and I'll just put one over to the right side. Just looking to see if there's any other stuff going on. Solos. So we have some solos right here. I know there's a solos. Again, I know the track. But leave these in the center for the time being, because solos, they don't usually happen with the vocal going on. So it's totally fine for those to be in the center. And because it's the focal point of the mix when it's happening, you do want to have that kind of going on in the center. Now, if you're going to have a solo on the side, usually you have the solo on the side because there's like two instruments playing that solo and joining it together. Maybe there's something else going on with the vocal, but you can make all those choices as you're going on in the mix. It's your aesthetic. It's also the aesthetic of the band. So, you really want to be dialed into what they're feeling. Maybe have them come in and listen to a few things when you're trying to do solos and get some stuff worked out. And again, going back to the very beginning, talking about cleaning up your mix. So I know here there's some BS going on. It's not doing anything. It's not the actual part. So if I play the song, you can tell that this is just a mistake. I'm going to boost it up for you guys a little bit. So that's just premature noise there. You just guitar player getting ready to go. Get rid of that. Now here's going to be a little bit tricky because this tone, there's a lot of dirt in it, a lot of gain, really high gain tone here. It's from a bomber. So what I would do in this situation is I would solo this and really try to figure out where that's starting, because you don't want to cut anything out. You don't want to clip the entrance there. The other trick you can do to help yourself out here, and I talk a lot about this, is using tab, the transient. It's already on right here. It's this blue button I have on. Turn that on and off. So I use my select tool, click on the track, hit tab, and then I can see it it's telling me where it thinks that audio is starting. Sometimes you got to pull it back a little bit. Sometimes it might be a little bit off, or you want to do it for safety reasons. But it looks like it's kind of close here. So it's not like a direct entrance. It sounds like there's a little bit of a scrape coming into it, which may or may not work. You might not hear it in the mix, so it's going to be your choice whether you need to take that out or not. But for the most part, that's kind of where I am. So I can go ahead and use Command E to separate that, because I'm just going to double click this and delete this part. It's not really doing much for me. And you can go ahead and add a fade on there. Some people like to add fades as they go along. I kind of go back and forth between adding my fades later and adding my fades as I go along, depending on where I am, with this mix, or what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about. A good reason to add your fades as you're going along is it does take away one step from the process later on, and it does keep you organized, so you don't forget to add a fade in there, because again, you don't want to have noise that's not necessary, like extra noodling or room noise, or you don't want to have that clip noise when the track is being cut off in the middle of a note being played. So I'll just go ahead and add a fade here. So Command F to go ahead and add a fade there. I'm not gonna be too particular about the fade right now. I'm just gonna use a basic fade. So it's a little bit smoother going in. Just as a side note too, I am going to go ahead and talk a little bit about how to do this fade. Fades are going to be relative to the view you have. So if you're zoomed in a lot, notice you can't even see the fade there. If I'm zoomed out a lot. If I try to add a fade here when I'm zoomed out, that's really taking up a lot of space, because the view I have, it's so compacted. Vice versa as well. If I'm zoomed in a lot, it looks like I might be taking up a lot of space, but because I'm so zoomed in, let me see if I can get this over a little bit so I can see it. If I'm so zoomed in, I'm thinking I'm taking up a lot of space. When I zoom out, well, I'm not really taking up that much space. So it's relative to where you are in your view mode. Let's see here. So I know my solos here. It's a stacked solo, so I can have these all in the center. I might not use all of them. Looks like there's like a synth guitar here. It may not be good. This is really dirty, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this synth guitar down. This is really for thickening. It's not really supposed to be the main feature here. I'm going to listen to this little section here on this first synth guitar and see if this is actually doing anything in my mix, just like I did with my bomber track. Yeah, so that sounds like practicing the solo, getting ready to go. Nothing wrong with that. Let your player do what they got to do in the room, but in the mix, you got to take that out. It's not doing anything. So I'm just going to do a really quick, blend of this solo. Now, one thing to consider, since there are 3 tracks here, I'm just thinking creatively now, maybe I put one of these to the side, or maybe I put both of them to the side and leave one in the center. Leave the one that sounds more like a natural guitar. I'll leave that one in the center. And then I'll put the other ones over to the side to make it a little bit wetter. We'll try it out. I probably wouldn't spend too much time doing this when I'm first getting my mix started, but, we're here. Kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Looks like we have a question from Brandon here. How do you change the marker color? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Setup here. And then we're going to go to Preferences. Oop, got to quit that. Don't need to show that. And then you have color coding under Display. That's going to be the first option that comes up. Always display marker colors. You can turn that on and off. Cool. Cool. So next thing I'm going to look at here, I'm just seeing these tracks here, these overdub 2, 57, 122, again 57, and Royer 122, I believe was the mic that was used there. So I'm just seeing what these are doing. So it seems like there's a little bit of some licks going on to make our verse different. Always got to add that difference between verse to verse, so that way you keep having musical interest going on. And as a side note, one thing to consider if you're the mix engineer on a track and you come across a song that just has verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, whatever, and not doing anything different from verse to verse to keep your interest, you might be able to interject some of your creativity to make some stuff happen in the mix, different from verse to verse. So that way, there's always something new to listen for. You know, you always want to have your listeners wanting to hear your song again, to listen to new stuff, or maybe it's just because it's so awesome. It's hard to do that if the track is just, you know, the same thing all the way through. So something to consider, maybe help out your artist a little bit. Maybe might, you know, get a production credit on it, or, you know, maybe they might hire you back, or maybe word gets around that you actually, you know, kind of know how to do that match to make the song sound amazing, even though they just had like a boring song going on. You know, who knows? So let me just cover a few more things here, and then we'll wrap up because it's getting kind of late here. So I'm going to pan these to the side. Again, I want to listen to them and see what's going on. I think they're the same part, just recorded with 2 different microphones and my talk back. You know, I might want to see if there's something there. Probably not there. I'm just going to mute that for the time being. Now, you don't always have to have everything stacked, and you don't always have to have everything panned hard left, hard right. Sometimes one is enough. So I don't need to have 2 of these. They sound kind of similar. Like when I'm listening to that in the mix, they're not that different. They're definitely the same part, and they don't sound different sonically, that I really need to have these hard left and hard right to create like a stack or anything like that. So maybe I just leave my big guitar stacked, my rhythm guitar stacked, put one of these over to the side. And we didn't really talk too much about the vocal or doing volume stuff here. As you can see, this is really just the tip of the iceberg here. There's so much stuff involved with just getting a mix started, and that's why I was saying it's really crucial for you to be able to get this done quickly, or at least start to do it quickly, because, you know, as you can see, we did a lot of things here. We changed colors, we organized our tracks, we put form in there. You know, we were talking about cleaning tracks up. We didn't physically do a lot of that, but we talked about it. So if we were really doing this mix, we would be cleaning stuff up, adding in fades. You know, there's still a lot of stuff to be done here in this mix. So this is really the tip of the iceberg. So, you know, as you can see, it's important to be able to kind of get this done quickly, especially if somebody's watching you do it. If you're in the studio with your band or a client you're trying to impress, you want to be able to be like, oh yeah, I got this. You know, I've knocked this out in quick mix, 15 minutes, something like that. You know. So, you know, if you guys are interested in this, you know, of course, you know, you can always take us up in student services on more sessions about this. Or if you're not a student, you're trying to get into the program, you know, definitely contact an admissions rep about getting into the program here. You know, you can be on your way to doing this. But as we're wrapping up here, let's just go ahead and look at the vocal real quick, boost it up a little bit, see what's going on there. Again, I would be adjusting volumes of my groups or my individual tracks as I'm going along, because I'm trying to create some space. So if I have everything at the same volume, I don't really have space. Everything is still kind of just jumbled together. So I turned up those lit guitars there, those verse lit guitars. Got my stacked guitars at the same volume. Turned my drums up a little bit because I need some more power out of those. I'm going to turn up my vocal. Now there's a bunch of different theories about mixing and where to start with the mix. Some people like to have their vocal up loud first and build everything around their vocal. Works for some people, doesn't always work for me. I'm the kind of guy who likes to start with my bass and my drums. Dave Pensato says that if you get the drums and the bass right in the rock mix, you know, a lot of stuff just falls into place after that. And for me, I've had the most success doing that with my own stuff or with somebody else's stuff. So, and that's the way I'm going. But, you know, this is a tutorial on prepping it, so we're doing it as we're going along for learning purposes. So I got my vocal at -2.1, so significantly louder than the rest of my stuff going on in the mix. So you can tell there's all those guitars, drums, and all that stuff really drowning out my vocal. So I had the boost past +0. Typically, I don't like to go past 0. Zero is the stopping point. That's unity. If stuff's too loud and I have to go past 0, I turn other things down in place of that. So anyway, we ran out of time here. So we got some basics here on how to get this mix going. Hopefully this helped you out. And again, you know, if you're in the program already, you're interested in getting more on this, or, you know, getting in depth or looking at one of your mixes, go ahead and give us a call, Student Services. Again, my name is Jamal. I'm already some of your advisors. So call me up, or you call one of your own advisors, or if you want to just talk to me anyway, you can still give me a call. I'm usually pretty friendly. I'm just joking. I always help you guys out. And definitely, if you're interested in joining the program, you can contact with my admissions reps, and you can see more from me. You can also, just get perspectives from your mentor, or whoever else you're learning from, who's coming through your studio. Who knows who's going to be coming through your studio. Anyway, last thing, follow us on social media, Facebook, Recording Connection, Instagram, all that good stuff. See what we have going on, and be on the lookout for the next Google Hangout, all right? That's it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end this session. You guys have been great. Good questions.